Uh, so, General, recently I visited the Yole Cant and and could see the memorial of Somnath Sharma. And that actually had a lot of memories and discussions of the times, and there were more war heroes around that time as well. So I was wondering if we could recount the times of partition and General Somnath and Somnath Sharma, and of course, you weren't in army at that time, right? Your brothers were.
Yeah, I was only about 17 years old.
And you were not looking at getting into army at that point in time. You were.
No, I wasn't. As I told you last time, 1946.
Right.
An important year because I had left RIMC in Dehradun after my senior Cambridge, and I had gone to Shabad College in Nainital, which was my old school.
Right.
And I had been in Shabad from class standard 1 to standard 5. Left them at the age of 11. And when I came back to them in 1946, March. So I was going on 16 years of age. And Reverend Binge, the then principal, received me. He told me, you can't be a prefect here because you've been absent for 5 years, but nevertheless, you're a senior school student and you have all the privileges that the prefect will have. So we went on from there, and within 1 year, since I had not done chemistry in RIMC, we didn't have a chemistry laboratory there. So I had to start from scratch, and the chemistry master was very kind, and he gave me time off duty to carry out all the chemical experiments inside the laboratories, which is the main thing. The books I caught up with. And the result was that at the end of the year, early 1947, he came back to Sherwood. Sherwood normally stops its curricula in the middle of December. Everybody goes home for 3 months and they come back towards the end of March. But we who were the inter-science people had a board exam at the end of March. So we had to come in January to Nainital. It was very cold. And only us, the intermediate science boys, came in early 47, this January, to Sherwood. And the girls from All Saints College, our sister school, who were also sitting for the intermediate science, their group came. And at our house, we used to get together and stroll around and climb the hills and do whatever it is, picnics, etc., because that we amused ourselves during off-class hours. And one got to know a lot of people, very nice people, mostly Anglo-Indian and British. And the international scene was that, if you recollect, in 1945, the war came to an end. That's World War II. After the Americans dropped the 2 atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki of Japan, wiping out 2 complete cities with tens of thousands of old men, women, children being destroyed in a flash, and the remaining odd 15, 20,000 who survived to suffer with nuclear radiation for the rest of their lives. So they died a very unseemly and agonizing death. Compare that to today's Ukraine, if you like. People seem to have forgotten the disaster caused by the so-called allies of the West in those days of the war. So now, anyway, that was a lot of discussion going on because this had happened and the war was finished. And now there was a lot of agitation for the British to leave India. I kept touch with that in 1946, where we were studying for the final exam. And my brother Som, who had been fighting in Burma, he did very well over there. I've given a bit of that history to you earlier. in the causes of the British leaving India, when I told you, just to recap, that it wasn't Mahatma Gandhi's non-violence alone that caused that departure, but the restiveness of the Indian Army and the fact that many of our Indian officers had become brigadiers during the war,
right,
and functioned extremely well, better than many of their British forebears. And they were in touch with Lord Auchinleck, the Field Marshal, who was the overall Commander-in-Chief in India. And they told him, quite, he was known as the Hawk, to say, look here, sir, if you don't get out now, none of you will be allowed to leave. Everyone will be killed right here.
right.
And forget about the 1857 mutiny. And Churchill, as I had recapped, had said over my dead body, and we all were saying, well, let's see his dead body. In the event, as luck would have it, he lost his election in 1945, and Clement Attlee from the Labour Party took control. He sent Lord Louis Mountbatten in early 47 to get the hell out of India as fast as possible. All right. So we students did discuss all this amongst ourselves, because though we were studying, the world was changing so fast that these were very hot topics and everyone wanted to discuss these. We did do that. There are a lot of differences of view. The British thought differently. The Anglo-Indians thought that they were British, and the Indians were a little minority who nobody listened to. Nonetheless, we did our exam in March 1947, and I exited from Sherwood College by April 47. I told you that it got a very good result.
Yes.
And Reverend Binns had given me a very nice letter, which we sent to England. And in those days, the principals had a huge say. If the students were good and they recommended him, they were straight away accepted in college without even an interview. I got admission straight away into St. Stephen's College, which is also run by Christians. And I also got admission to Cambridge University, but they couldn't fit me in the June course at the tripos for the science tripos in Cambridge University. They gave me the vacancy for middle 1948, the next year. So in other words, in 47, when I was just about coming to 17, I left Nainital and I went to join my father, who was in Rawalpindi, which is near Islamabad, presently Pakistan.
Right.
So he was posted there as the senior medical officer, as the chief medical officer. And he was a full colonel in the British Indian Medical Services, it was known. And my sister, Manorma, there are two sisters older than I, Manorma and Kamla. Manorma was the elder, and she was in IT college, Isabella Thoburn College in Lucknow. And Kamla also joined her there for a bit. But Kamla in 1947 got admission to Lady Hardinge Medical College for a degree in medicine, MBBS. My sister Manorma came back and she was staying with us in Rawalpindi. So father, mother, myself, and my sister were there in early 1947. Now, what happened in 1947 is there's a lot of agitation, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs together to agitate for the departure of the British. And when Lord Mountbatten came in about April or March, April, to take over as Viceroy of India from Lord Wavell, as ordered by Clement Attlee, within 3 or 4 months, he decided that the British must quit. Okay. Now, August 15, the day that was accepted for the dominion status of India after partition, and August 14 for Pakistan, all the pundits and the Muslim soothsayers and the Sikh soothsayers and religious heads, they said that according to Jyotish, the stars, is the worst date possible to have for independence. Okay. But Mountbatten insisted because they had to get out of India as fast as they could. And so the result is that they went without too much preparation. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who, as you recollect, was a Congress member, he wanted to be the president of the Congress party. He had been earlier, he wanted to be. But Jawaharlal Nehru was considered the blue-eyed boy of Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi requested the Congress Working Party to get together to elect the president. And we came to know in 47 that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was selected as a prime minister by majority. So Jawaharlal apparently started howling, and he went to Mahatma Gandhi and said, look, this is what's being done. So Mahatma Gandhi requested Sardar Patel to step aside. Since he all obeyed the Mahatma, in the next working committee meeting, we all came to know that Sardar Patel has stepped aside and become the Home Minister. So Nehru was elected as the president. Jinnah got upset and he demanded partition. See, of course, it was a cry for partition right from 1941. But nonetheless, this was pushed very hard, assisted by the British, whose one technique of rule is to divide everybody and rule. As you recollect, the Western powers have divided Korea into two parts, North Korea and South Korea. They draw a line which is forever a line of conflict. They divided Vietnam into two parts, the French did. North Vietnam and South Vietnam, there is a line of conflict. And they divided India into two parts. Both the partition lines were lines of absolute conflict. The line many times went through the middle of a village, to the middle of fields in Punjab and Bengal. So that half your land went to the other country and half your land is with you on both sides. So you can imagine. It was an encouragement for mayhem, and mayhem took place. So we were in Rawalpindi as the Partition Independence Day approached, 14th of August, 1947. And around about April, May, the killing started. You had Razakars in Pakistan. Well, it was not Pakistan yet, but in the portion of Western Punjab, which was going to be divided, their job, as instructed by the Prime Minister, was to kill every Hindu in sight. Women were raped and they all jumped into wells to try and save themselves. Rather than be dishonored, preferred death. And those who were captured were kept as concubines or whatever amongst the Muslims. And result was that when they started killing the Hindus and Sikhs in Western Punjab, the same started off on the eastern half of Punjab also. Mountbatten and Jawaharlal Nehru and Lady Edwina Mountbatten were going around everybody trying to cool tempers. So was Sardar Patel, so were others. But mayhem. And Somnath, my brother, his battalion had come back from Burma and Indonesia, where they had gone last. After the war, for the surrender of the Japanese, they came back and they positioned in Rohtak, which is presently Haryana, and those days it was Punjab. And he was doing internal security duties with his battalion. Then the battalion was moved to Delhi to do internal security duties here. The headquarters is where the Parliament Street police station is now. Parliament Street is now Sansad Marg. And so the headquarters was there. And he was doing his duties, as I said. And I must tell you that whether they were Muslim troops or whether they were Indian troops, they were strictly fair in dealing with the revolt and dealing with the people killing each other. No matter who were doing what, they said that we'll shoot a lot of you if you don't stop. And whenever the army arrived on the scene, they did stop. But the moment the army went away, they started off again. Day and night it carried on. We were in Rawalpindi, and my father decided that three of us should get out of that area, because he couldn't move anywhere since he was a colonel and he was posted there, and he can't move till he gets posted. And my brother, second elder brother, that's Surendranath, who was a captain at that time, and he's a parachutist and an engineer. He was in the Chaklala airfield, which is next to Rawalpindi, and the main airfield of Pakistan now. And he was Army Air Transport Group who were training people to drop supplies from aircraft to pickets on the ground with parachutes and all that, how to load the aircraft, how to distinguish the various loads, and go over the northwest frontier where we had various pickets and drop the supplies to troops of both sides. To troops holding the northwest frontier border between British India and Afghanistan. So we were doing that. So he couldn't go till he was posted out. And so we got into a car on the 13th of August. And there's an excellent road from Rawalpindi via Abbottabad or Abbottabad, Murray, and a place called Domail, where the Indus is joined by the Jhelum. And you cross a bridge there and you get into J&K territory, Jammu and Kashmir territory. So from there, you go straight via Muzaffarabad to Baramulla and hence to Srinagar. It's an excellent road.
How long is that journey?
About 2-3 hours, I said, 4 hours.
Okay.
3.5 hours. So there was a Sardarji friend of my father, a lawyer, and he took us there. And my brother Tindi got a truck and followed us just to give us protection with some armed men, and my brother Surinder. And we reached Srinagar, and we stayed in the first bridge across the Jhelum. That particular district of Srinagar is a hotbed of terrorism now, but it was the first bridge over the Jhelum. There's 6 or 7 bridges across the Jhelum. And my father had his, my Nana, that's my mother's father. He had retired as an advisor to the Maharaja of Kashmir, Pratap Singh, not Hari Singh, but Hari Singh's stepfather. Pratap Singh was a very interesting Maharaja, and my both grandparents, father's father and mother's father, had served under him. My father's father was his personal Hakim, that's Unani medicine.
Okay.
And my mother's father was in charge of his accounting office, accounts of the Maharaja, state accounts. So they both retired. And we went and stayed with my grandfather, the Nana, my mother's father. He was about 80 years old. And he had a separate wooden room, large room, like a houseboat. Ever been to a houseboat? A houseboat is on the Jhelum River.
Yes.
It's a large boat with class standard, five-star standard of fittings. You have drawing rooms and dining rooms and toilets and kitchens and so on. So he had a big room to himself like that on stilts because there was flooding from the Jhelum. And he used to study the Gita in the morning, and I used to sit with him for 2 hours every morning to hear his translations of the Gita. And at that particular point of time, he was translating the area of non-violence.
Oh.
Now we were all a little annoyed with great Mahatma's ideas of non-violence because it was, we are students and children, and for us, you need a simple explanation about what is the meaning of non-violence.
Yeah.
So according to Mahatma, you will not raise your hand. He quoted Jesus Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, where the Lord Christ had said, turn the other cheek. When somebody asked him, what do I do when my elder brother beats me up? He said, turn the other cheek. Now, my Nana, he explained to me that Mahatma Gandhi's non-violence is actually not according to the Gita, but according to a derivative from the Gita. Idea here being that to gain independence for India, you had to face the British Raj and the Indian Army. Indian Army had taken its oath of office to the Union Jack. The present army, as you see, is designed, organized, and raised by the British during their 200 years Raj. They first designed these regiments and units for protection of their godowns, etc., when they first came to India in 1917, 18. And they got permission from the Marathas to do that. They raised them from there. So they eventually had an army in Bengal presidency, they had an army in Bombay presidency, and they had an army in Madras presidency. And these units were organized like British infantry units, officered by British officers. But you had Indian troops, and they created the rank of what we call JCO. Now, JCO is a junior commissioned officer. The junior commissioned officer gets a salute from the men and called Sahib. So in those days, it was known as a Viceroy's Commissioned Officer, VCO. It does not exist in the British Army. So the British Army, amongst the ranks, the command and control aspect of the ranks is you have a corporal with 2 stripes, then you have a sergeant with 3 stripes, you have a sergeant major, and you have a company sergeant major, and you have a regimental sergeant major who's the boss. Indian Army, you got all those. In addition, you've got JCOs. In those days, it was the Jamadar Sahab, the Subedar Sahab, and the Subedar Major Sahab. The Subedar Major Sahab was the top rank that they reached, and he was the personal advisor to the commanding officer of the regiment. Of course, now we call them junior commissioned officers, and we've cut out the name of Jamadar Sahab. We call him Naib Subedar Sahab, and then his next rank is Subedar Sahab, then Subedar Major. In the Armored Corps, to which I belong, they are known as Risaldars. We have a Naib Risaldar and a Risaldar and a Risaldar Major. Risaldar is the cavalry term of the person who's responsible to get the troops together for battle. So we had the JSO ranks, and we found that, now coming back to the story, I mean, my grandfather told me that Mahatma Gandhi's non-violence is designed to wrest independence for India. And the wresting of independence for India meant that he cannot fight the Indian army. So the idea was not to fight, but to occupy roads and other places and sit there and not obey any orders from the government. So yes, if you're non-violent and you're sitting on the road in a mass of human beings, the roads get blocked, traffic doesn't move. And the greatness of this Mahatma, I might explain to you, he had no radio sets, no telephone, no communication system. But if he said that tomorrow at this time, we will all sit here on the road throughout India, the Janta of India would sit on the road. So you can imagine now one of the points I must tell you that the British are law-abiding people. They're criminals in other ways. They make a lot of money on the side and they looted India, no doubt. But if there was a law, a very strict law, I'd explained to you earlier about the mutiny on the Blighty, mutiny on the Bounty, and how he eventually, it took years. But British warships and others eventually caught the people who had mutinied after many years and punished them, put them in jail. Because the law says that if somebody's made a crime, you have to catch him by hook or by crook, no matter how many years it takes. The long arm of the law, even if it takes 30 years, but eventually that person has to be caught and punished. So they are law-abiding. And I do say that this movement for our independence, if people don't understand today, I doubt if Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent effort would have succeeded had the rulers of India not been British. Supposing they were Germans, for instance. Germans would have shot you up. They wouldn't listen to any reason. See? But in the British governance, the question, you can't sort of murder people who are not opposing, not fighting. Nobody's throwing a stone, they're just sitting there. And if you want them to move, you lathi charge them and they accept the lathis, but they don't move. So then eventually you lift them up and put them somewhere else. And whenever you put them, they keep sitting there. Okay. It's a very interesting civil disobedience, copied by many nations after that. Right? So including people in America and other places like the blacks in America, they've used these techniques. And Mahatma Gandhi was in touch with Tolstoy of Russia, who was a great writer and philosopher and thinker, with Romain Rolland, who was a great spiritual man in France, with many spiritual leaders in Britain, in America, and even in the Middle East and in Africa. they were all talking together. Because many of the colonies of the Western nations were all agitating for independence, and they were really taken up with this technique. This Mahatma Gandhi had tried in South Africa first with some success, and then he came to India and started that here. All right, we'll go on from there. But my grandfather explained to me that the non-violence explained in the Gita is also in the Muslim tradition.
Okay.
It's also in the Turkish tradition.
Okay.
That non-violence is non-violence of the mind, not of the physical action. In other words, you cannot function in anger. You have to function with a cool, collected mind, decide what you have to do, and if in your wisdom, from your conscience. So when you cool the mind, God Himself speaks to you, your own mind, since according to our theory, every human being has got a part of God inside him or her. Therefore, instead of getting into a temper, instead of getting into agitation, to cool yourself and then decide what is to be done and then do it. If you decide at that stage that somebody has to be beaten up, then you beat him up. And if you decide that he has to be killed, he has to be killed. But there's no passion.
Okay.
Now, when Jesus Christ described the Sermon on the Mount, when somebody asked him that, "Sir, my elder brother beats me up every day, what am I supposed to do?" He said, "Turn the other cheek." Now, this explanation, I have got the best explanation of this statement from Yogananda, who's written a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi. I don't know if you've read it.
I've read it.
You haven't read it.
Yes.
I'd advise you to all read it and make your children read it and make your school children read it. It's a very interesting book because how does a man who's a simple human being just like anybody else, how does he become a yogi? So he claims that. Now he studied the Christian religion. He said that Vedanta has a lot of similarities with Islam, that's the Quran, and also with Christianity, and also with Sikhism, with every religion, Jainism. Now, when you look at these religions, there are three basic religions of the book. Those are the Palestine religions. It started with Judaism, went on with the birth of Christ 2,200 years ago. Dates are not very clear. And he brought in Christianity, which gave rise to Catholic Christianity, Protestant Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and many divisions of people who think slightly different because the interpretation of the gospel is different. Like you have in Islam, I mean, the Prophet was not an educated man. He couldn't speak in an educated tongue. But his friends noticed that he would have dreams. And when he had dreams, he used to quote couplets when he used to wake up, which are of high knowledge and very tremendously advanced language. So many of his friends started recording what he used to say. And so this was his visions. Based on the recordings, the Quran has been written. Now, when in the case of Lord Christ, Christ never wrote anything himself. He made statements. He had certain 12 gospels written by 12 of his followers.
Right.
Each one of these have written the gospel of the New Testament about what Christ used to say. Now, the interpretation of what somebody has heard may not have the exact meaning of what that person intended to say.
Right.
Now, let's come back to turn the other cheek. It means that when you got a slap, you have to, instead of an immediate result of anger or fear or revenge or whatever, to cool the mind.
So don't react. Don't react.
Take time to understand what you should do. After that, if you decided in your mind that perhaps you were at fault, then you need to apologize to the person who has been slapping you. If you are not at fault and you're doing it just for the heck of it, like a bully, then you take him on. But when you take him on, you're not angry or passionate. You are cool, collected. I don't know if you ever seen boxing. In my RMC, there's boxing. Shabbat College, there's boxing. I started boxing from the age of 6. Everybody had to box. The manly art of self-defense. You got thrashed or you gave a thrash. Now, in boxing, if somebody hits you on the face and you get angry and start flaying around, you're going to get hell of a beating. The other chap is a good boxer. You have to cool it. Unless you're cool and collected in your mind, it's the mind which runs the body. So you have to then face, according to your plan of action, after quiet, deliberate thought. That is non-violence. In the Muslim tradition, there's that example of Hazrat Ali. Hazrat Ali, as you know, was the son-in-law of the Prophet. And his father was the father-in-law of the Prophet. Because they intermarry uncles and nieces. And why they do that and why they had 4 wives permitted is because there were a lot of fights in those days. There were very shortage of manpower. So there were a large number of women who were not married and did not have husbands and could not have children. So people were authorized to have more wives so that they had the woman has a pleasure of becoming a mother and raising children, which really builds the woman with her full character and conduct. A woman who has not had children doesn't know half the equation of how life is to be done. A mother has much more because she's been through the business of raising a child. When you're raising a child, you see all sorts of children coming in the world, and the love of a mother for the child is the purest form of love that we all know in this world of ours. I have seen terrible terrorists, and when you go to his family and say, look, this child has done this, this is what my boy. Impossible. Such a nice fellow. So it's a lot of respect for the mothers.
Right.
So no, that is the idea there. Now in the question of turn the other cheek, if violence or emotion has come, the mind is like a limpid pool. And if you're looking into this pool, you must have a clear reflection of your thought process. But when the limpid pool, you're looking into this mind of yours to see what do I do next. If you have any passion, any emotional feeling, whether it is fear, whether it's jealousy, whether it's anger, it's like putting a pebble into the pool. So the ripples, you do not get a clear image. If you act at that time, your action may not result in success.
Right.
Because it is not guided by a cool, collected mind which is guiding the action, right? There are 5 senses, and the description in the Kalyan Kalpatru, which my mother used to read, those are a weekly magazine of the interpretation of the Gita, of the Mahabharata, or of the various incidents that took place in the Ramayana. And one of the things it says is that the mind is like a chariot and was led by 5 horses, which are the 5 senses. These 5 senses are not controlled, and these 5 horses are not kept on the track of advancement by the charioteer, who's your intellect. Then one horse is going here, one is going there, one is there. The chariot does not keep to the straight and narrow path. To control the mind. And if you control the mind, these 5 senses have to be controlled. If you do that, and the mind becomes cool. Another factor that comes out here, described very well by Yogananda, is that there is a hell of a noise in everybody's head. It's in my head, it's in your head, it's in everybody's head. A lot of thoughts running around in the mind, millions of them. So many people say get into meditation to control this. Meditation may or may not control, but you have to do a lot of effort. It requires perhaps a lifetime of effort to try and control the noise in the mind.
Right.
So talk of religion. Religion does not teach you this. Religion says you're a Christian and you have to die becoming a Christian. If you don't go to a church, you'll go to hell and you'll burn there. Or Islam says that, well, if you're not a Muslim, you're a bloody kafir. And the kafir ought to be brought to the proper thought process, otherwise kill the poor child. He's a danger to himself.
Right.
And I must tell you, there was a famous Louis XIV, Cardinal Richelieu's days in France. He was known as the Sun King.
Okay.
This would be 14th century or so. He was the king of France. He was the most powerful king in the world, Louis IV.
Yes.
He's the man who said, Après moi, the flood. That means when I leave, there'll be the flood of mediocrity in this land because I'm the only man who can run it. Right? So when you become a very powerful king, you become very arrogant and you think that without you, nothing else will run. Anyway, he said about the colonies that were being required to be made in Africa and India and Southeast Asia, that those are heathens. Why are they heathens? Because they're not Christian.
Okay.
Right? And therefore, it's the duty, the white man's burden to go there, bring them into the line of Christianity so that their souls are saved. It's our duty, the white man's burden. We have to go and kill them and sort them out and bring them to Christianity, otherwise they're all going to die burning in hell, right? Anyway, they didn't realize that both China and India and many African tribal nations have huge concepts of spiritualism,
right,
their own, and they don't have to believe it. If you look at India, a nation which has been a slave for about almost 1,000 years, slave emperors which were Islamic earlier, then the Mughal Empire, then the British Empire. We are the only land conquered by Christianity and by Islam who has not converted to Christianity and Islam. As Islam conquers a country, everybody becomes Islamic.
Right.
If Christians have conquered a nation, everybody becomes Christian because they have to survive. In India's case, 85% of the population is still Hindu. And during the Mughal Raj, they used to pretend to be Muslims so that they're not, but they had a little murti or something at home, which they quietly do puja outside. They managed to walk around in a burqa, pretending to be Muslim, see, to survive. So the three religions in Palestine, the Hebrews, the Christianity and Islam are religions of the book. What was written by their prophets 2,000, 3,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago is the gospel. Right. And we got so big. If I talked a little earlier about Hazrat Ali, he's the first man who said that as the centuries pass, people may change. Therefore, you will have prophets coming to guide you as the civilization or the people advance in years. What somebody wrote, what Muhammad said, or the Prophet said, may not always be functional if there's an advancement of technology and culture and civilization. Now, he is the leader of the Shia clan, and his father-in-law, who was his father, was the leader of the Sunnis. The Sunnis believe that whatever Muhammad said is the gospel, he's the only prophet, and there's no other. And these other guys believe that there could be other prophets as the life went on. And as you can see, the Shias and Sunnis are merrily killing each other. Iran is Shia. A large number of Shia mosques, etc., in Afghanistan and in Pakistan are being destroyed by terrorists. Why? Because they are Shia. So in Christianity, you have a large number of sects. Today you see a war in Ukraine going on. The Western Teutonic races, the western half of Ukraine, are Protestant Christian. The eastern half, who are Slav extraction, speak Russian, they are Orthodox Christian. There's difference in style and difference of religion, like the difference between Catholics and Protestants. They're ready to go to war with each other and fight. Then religion is not the answer. The answer is a spiritualism. What some people say, they are agnostics, for example. Yes, there's a God. He's doing his duty. Let's leave him to do that. You please run a good life, and that's enough for you. Many people don't go to church. Many people don't go to masjids. But as you develop the mind by appropriate education, right, you have to get above religion or the dogma of religion and If you are a thinking person or a philosophical person, then maybe you should try and cool the noise in your head, which is meditation. Now, meditation is not religious.
Yeah.
It is open to anyone. And we have yoga, which comprises physical exercises, which according to the Western world, you're stretching yourself. But it's not just stretching yourself, it's exercising. If I take a weight, let's say this is a weight, and I hold it in my arm like that, just hold it. Am I exercising or am I not exercising? You'll notice that here, the muscles are under tension.
Right.
The sinews, which help the muscles to function, and the nervous system, which helps the sinews to function, are all functioning.
Right.
Western exercise is this. Why? Because I am building up this muscle. And that trouble with that exercise is I build up this muscle, this forearm becomes weak.
Right.
I don't know if you've seen a comic called Popeye the Sailor Man.
Yes, yes.
Popeye the Sailor Man is a very interesting chap.
Yes.
He has a pipe. And he has pipe going.
Yes.
And he has spinach. Now in those days, children didn't like spinach, but spinach is iron, gives you a lot of goodies.
Yes.
To encourage spinach to bring, when Popeye was being thrashed by somebody, then he takes his pipe and he opens the spinach tun and puts a whole lot of spinach inside, and muscle bulks up here. So when he wants to give you a hook like that, this muscle is required. So this muscle is up. And when he wants to do that, then this muscle, he presses here and that muscle comes here.
Right.
But that's Western exercise.
Right.
Yoga is to control the balance and develop the sinews of the body. And those stretching exercises are basically made to function to exercise your spine. Now, Nivedita, the most important bone in your body and in mine is the spine. It comes from the neck and goes down to the tailbone.
Right.
If this spine is kept flexible and healthy, you're in excellent health, you'll never die. You become younger every year. People ask me or my brother that,
yes,
that chap is 98 and you're 92 and you're looking hale and hearty, you're running around like a young chap. Firstly, the mind is cool and collected. And secondly, the spine is exercised every day.
Okay.
So the spine, it has to exercise backwards to not allow you to droop like this. The structure of the human body is balanced on just 2 feet. The head is the heaviest portion. This head has to be kept straight. The back has to be rammed out straight. Whether you're sitting, or whether you're sitting on the floor, or you're sitting in a chair, you're standing up, the position of attention in army. It's straight. Stomach is in, chin is in, the back is straight. Right? Why doesn't everybody do that? The children do it. If you look at your child, little child, back is absolutely straight, no matter what he's doing. Even when you bend down, your back is straight.
Right.
So if the back is straight, the balance of the body is correct, the huge weight of the head is balanced correctly, so that no unnecessary stress comes on muscles which are not used to that stretch. For instance, you're doing this, you get spondylitis, you get back pain, you get sciatica.
Right.
Your hips start crumbling. Now you planned and look, I lived a long life and I'm not fit. It's your fault. Why don't you exercise yourself, keep yourself straight? In yoga, you exercise the spine. Bend it backwards, you bend it forward, you twist it this way, you twist it this way, in every conceivable way. The second thing is yoga is breathing. Now, the British exercise system, also Western, also deep breathing. Deep breathing, you fit your chest. How do you breathe? I mean, you have, if you look at the way the lungs are formed, they're narrow on top and they're huge, broad lungs at the bottom. So if you take a breath, it's the lower lungs which must expand.
Right.
Now the lower lungs are held by a diaphragm.
Right.
And the stomach is underneath. So when you breathe correctly, that means you've taken a deep breath, which has gone into the lower lung. The diaphragm is pressed down and the stomach comes up.
Right.
But a fashionable lady doesn't want to have a stomach coming up and down. Doesn't fit the tight belt and doesn't. It looks so good. So when you breathe, every breath, air has to go down to the bottom and your tummy must come out. If you see somebody sleeping or a child sleeping, the tummy is going up and down. But if you're breathing from the top of the chest like this, breath is only coming here. You're not getting the beautiful air that God has made, even if it's polluted. It changes your bad blood into red, beautiful red blood corpuscles, which go in all over the body and clean it up. And they move out carbon dioxide, which is the dirty gases come out, and you take fresh oxygen, nitrogen, whatever it is inside your chest. Breathe correctly. If you breathe correctly, your health is good, your chest is good. So those exercises of yoga and pranayama particularly is teaching you to breathe.
Right.
So everywhere in the world now, Mr. Modi has got it as an international show to have international yoga. And yoga basically is pranayama. Now, when you're doing pranayama, you have to control the thoughts. Each breath has to control the thought. You have to watch the breath. Now, if you do that, it's easy for you to control the thought process and your mind becomes blank. When you close your eyes, you see nothing else. Otherwise, you close your eyes and there's a television screen going on and all sorts of kahani on that, what happened yesterday, day before, and what about my girlfriend or my boyfriend or what nonsense goes on, right? So my grandfather taught me that when I was 16 and 17, when I ran away with my mother and sister to Srinagar. And then we were refugees because, the raiders started coming in early October. And we had to, my father, meanwhile, had to come out. He came out in September. August was the partition.
Oh.
And my father came out end of September. The moment he came to India, he became a major general. And then he requested Indian Airlines and others through Delhi to, please keep some seats for my family. So we managed to get out of Srinagar before the raiders entered. And we came to Delhi as refugees. We lived here. You know, a refugee, when they come here, you've got nowhere to stay. There are relatives and relatives. Some are discouraging for you to barge into their house. It spoils the style of living. Some are not even relatives and say, please come.
Right.
What sort of human being? You see so many refugees, millions coming out from Ukraine because they are blue-haired, blue-eyed and golden-haired. The world is taking notice of the cruelty of the Russian attack. But when that attack was done by the West on Japan, who are yellow, or the destruction they've done in Libya, or the destruction they've done in Syria, and they have destroyed the whole country called Iraq. I've been to Iraq before the invasion by the Americans. It was a budding civilization. This is before Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was the next man who took over. King Faisal was commanding. All right, it's a dictatorship, but these Muslim nations don't know what the hell democracy is. You can't throw it down their neck. The people have to decide what they want, right? You can't say, I, in America, I'm a Democrat and the whole bloody world has to be Democrat, otherwise I intervene and force it. Change the government. And you want to kill Saddam Hussein, as George Bush the Jr. said, George W. Bush, he was nasty with my dad. Come on. You destroyed that whole country. You made rubble into, or rather they made rubble into Basra and into Baghdad. And Baghdad is an ancient civilization just like India. They destroyed everything there. 7 bridges across the Euphrates and the Tigris were all proper. And then some of the Americans who wanted Indian assistance said, come on, we'll give you some contracts to build this, you make a lot of money, why don't you come and help us? We said, come on, we are not going to come into this. So what you see in the world is conflict, because the conflict is in men's minds. High time probably that the ladies should take over, because at least they're a little more compassionate. At least I hope they are. There are people and people, but by and large, I think they're more compassionate amongst the women because they bear children and they look after a life coming up from square day one. So they have a little compassion for life, as perhaps a man, especially the ruler who's a dictator, may not have. So we learned a lot in 1946 and 47. Because one was very alert as a student, I'm sure you were too. I mean, as far as the student is concerned, at the age of 16 and 17, the student thinks he knows more than everybody in the world.
I agree. Yeah, I would agree to that. Yeah.
He thinks he knows. And he doesn't have much respect for his mother and father, whom he had respect for earlier, but now he's seen them as mere human beings with a lot of fault. Isn't it? It's only when he has his children or his wife has his children and they go on to that level, they suddenly realize that the children are also thinking the same way about them. And that's life. Right? So I think we learned a lot about this. Now, when I came back here, Somnath was in Delhi. I met him before he left.
Okay.
He left Delhi on the maybe 28th of October. We were already here in Delhi. And he had a barakhana on one of the areas of Delhi where his company was. And he invited my mother and my sister and myself there. We went and enjoyed a barakhana with his troops. And they'd just come out of Burma. There was such a excellent group of young men. And he saved his, we have a batsman in those days, is like a bodyguard in battlefield, one of the Jawans. And he had got injured in a Japanese attack, which was being held by this battalion, the 419th Hyderabad, which 819th Hyderabad, but later became the 4th Command. And Som went back when he found, he had retreated from there with his company. And when he found that his backman was left, he went back to that position which was occupied by the Japanese and managed to find this man whose leg was broken and pick him up and bring him running back through a hail of bullets. He got a mention in dispatches for that, which is a sort of an award. And we met that chap, ready to give his life for my brother. And that chap was killed in action when they went to Kashmir. It ended, I think, on the 30th of October or so, the 1st of November. Within 3 days, he went for a patrol to Patkam. You know the story, it's all there in the citations of the government of India, etc. He was cited for the Victoria Cross. The government said that we're an independent country now, so Victoria Cross is a British award, the topmost gallantry award that there is. And therefore, we will design a similar award for India, and then they designed the Paramveer Chakra.
Right.
Nobody knew at the time that the lady who helped that design to the Adjutant General was Savitri Kanolka, who was a Hungarian Swiss lady who had married a second lieutenant from the Sikh regiment called Second Lieutenant Kanolka, when he had come from Sandhurst toward the late 2000s, 1920s, late 1920s. And he married her and brought her to India. So his family ousted him that he married a foreigner, and therefore he was barred from any family assistance. But he went on to become a major general. Okay. The Delhi area commander. And Savitri Kanolka was there, and she had studied. She's born Hungarian Swiss. There's so many conflicts in Europe. She's been through the whole of the World War II. And she said, and her family's been through World War I. And she studied the Vedanta. She studied the Ramakrishna because the chap got posted to Calcutta. She was very taken up with the Ramakrishna mission. And she became a sister of the Ramakrishna mission. And she became a yogi. So she helped the Adjutant General from my regiment, Hiralal Atal, a very fine officer, to design the Paramveer Chakra. And she designed it with the thunderbolt of Indra. You know, Indra, the god of rain and all that. He fired the thunderbolt.
Yes.
Which is a terrible weapon, because not only is a huge blast, but it's got flame, it's got everything, it destroys the opponent. So the Paramveer Chakra designed with 4 thunderbolts going in 4 directions, you see. And she designed that, and she never knew at that stage. But eventually that Paramveer Chakra was given to Somnath, whose younger brother, my elder brother, eventually married Savitri Kanolka's daughter. So Kumudini Kanolka, who's my brother's wife, he's 98, she's about 85 now, but she married him. And it's his elder brother who got the first award of the design by his mother-in-law. See, this is, maybe there's something more to fate than anybody believes. What do you say? In the West, they think we are mad to believe in a thing called fate. One American asked me, what is it? Fate means that you sit back and relax and something happens to you. I said, no, you've got to work your best at whatever you want to work. You work. And maybe you come to crossroads, like I came to a crossroads. I mean, Som got killed on the 3rd of November. My father was a Major General. We went to Ranchi. And it was Eastern Command of the Indian Army. The army commander there was Thakur Nathu Singh, who came and visited me when he was 96 years old, when I was the army chief, calling me by my pet name, Sonny or something. Hey, Sonny, I want to write the history which nobody has written, because he was present as the advisor to Sardar Patel during the days of partition. He's a military assistant to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. See? So he was sitting there when Lord Mountbatten and others were discussing with Nehru, and there were only two Indians. Nehru was purportedly going to be the prime minister, and after partition, and Sardar Patel was going to be the home minister. And there's a story about that I'll tell you. He told me that when the British commander-in-chief called Rob Lockhart had to be sacked, because when the raiders of Pakistan went into Kashmir, assisted and abetted by British officers to organize this, so that they wanted Kashmir to come to Pakistan. Why? Because the Indians are the devious Hindu mind. Nobody trusts. Because if the British wants, the British should do something, Jawaharlal Nehru said, we've got a working committee, we'll discuss this and we'll see what happens next. So they're humming and hawing and not giving you the answer which a subservient country would give you. Pakistan don't think much. The Muslim he makes a very good soldier, but he hits you first before thinking about it. Different the Hindu is that he'll think 10 times before hitting you. Because he said, if I hit this chap, one of these days he hit me back, he might hit my wife and all that, so I better not hit him. Hindu think that way. Muslim doesn't bother about that. He just hits you first and then suffers the consequences thereof. So the previous Hindu mind was not trusted by the British. So they decided that because Kashmir Maharaja opted to join India, it's not acceptable to the British. So they moved the Pakistani people inside. You capture the bloody place. The excuse of this was that Indian troops went into Hyderabad and took it over. So like Pakistan troops. Pakistan army was not fit enough to do this, but they provided experienced JCOs, NCOs, and officers in several ways to tribal Lashkars who were now attacking the northwest border of Pakistan. Hey, look, you are Muslim, you go to Kashmir and take that place. And they went to Kashmir as Muslim raiders, raping all the Muslim women. So, all right, if you're a Muslim, you don't start raping your own women. Come on, why don't you have some? But the tribal is not like that. He just wants to take whatever he can, whether it's money or goodies, or rape the women, play hell, burn up the place, destroy. No thought of future love. For instance, take the beautiful trees of Kashmir. I've seen this myself because I was posted there for so many years. You have fruit trees which are brought up with great love and affection. Some of the best fruit in this country come from Kashmir. Apples, oranges, anar, pomegranate, and all these, and badam. Pure badam. Now, badam tree takes many years. It takes 15 years to mature. So the badam trees in Baramulla district, they cut them. They didn't want the economy to succeed. So that attitude of the fundamentalist Islamite is to destroy. Why? Because they're not, and you say, all right, you should convert to Islam, but all those people are Islam. They are Muslims. But they are more Shias. They are more sensible people. So we were very disgusted with them. This is what they did. And the British were helping them with this. So even when Jawaharlal Nehru made the first great mistake that this country has had to suffer, not that Jawaharlal was a bad man, he's a tremendous chap. He's done so much for this country. I mean, he, in his 16, 17 years, gave us a democracy, had an opposition, and listened to them. And this country, which has never had a democracy in its existence, we've always dealt with Maharajas and kings. We've become one of the largest, we are in fact the largest democracy in the world. So, anyway, Vallabhbhai Patel, when this discussion was taking place that the British commander-in-chief had been sacked because he never informed that the British have, that the Pakistani troops have gone into Kashmir, planning to go there. We only came to know in late October when these people actually moved there. Siddharth Patel raised the point to our CNC that you're a British CNC in India, there's a British CNC in Pakistan, and the overall commander-in-chief is a British man. Why didn't you tell us that people are coming into Kashmir?
Right.
Because Kashmir Maharaja has not joined anyone yet, but he might join us. How can you move troops in? So they sacked Rob Lockhart, the first English chief. And the second man that they elected as the commander-in-chief in India was Roy Boucher, General Roy Boucher. He had a tenure of only 1 year. Now it said in 1948 and he's going. So Jawaharlal Nehru said, we need to get another British officer to be the commander-in-chief because our Indian officers are only brigadiers. They have no experience to command the Indian Army. And those days, the commander-in-chief of the army was also commanding the Navy and the Air Force because it was a much smaller organization. So, Thakur, not to say brigadier, whispered something in the ear of Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel started up. Nehru got very angry. He kept angry very quickly. So, what is this joke? I mean, laughing at me? What's that? So Sardar Patel turned on to the brigadier and said, Brigadier, you tell the Prime Minister of India what you said. So Thakur Nathan Singh said, Sir, Prime Minister, sir, I just said that even the Prime Minister of India is not experienced. He doesn't know how to run a country. So we should ask for a British chap to be the Prime Minister. Since you want another British officer to command the Indian Army because the Indians are not experienced, well, neither are the Indian politicians experienced. So we should ask the British to be a Prime Minister in India.